Seventh grade. This is attempt number 2 to make this video on the letter of St. Jude. Um, you guys missed out on all the hilarious jokes that I made in the first video because apparently it was muted. I think it's because I left my AirPods in, um, and so I was connected to the computer's Bluetooth. And I'm wondering if that somehow messed with the sound. So I'm so sorry that you had to miss out on the jokes. But never fear. Instead of telling jokes, I think I'm going to give you guys a few pickup lines that you can use in honor of National Nurses Day, which is May 6th. So today's National Nurses Day, and I've got a few good nurse pickup lines. So feel free to try them out when you get older. If one or two of you starts to date a nurse, or if a man is a nurse, I call him a nurse or a merce. So here we go. Do you have an inhaler? Because you took my breath away. Are you a coronary artery? Because you're wrapped around my heart. Ow. Do you have a Band-Aid? Because I scraped my knee when I was falling for you. All right, there we go. 3 solid nurse-related pickup lines for 7th grade in honor of National Nurse Day. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the introduction to the letter of St. Jude and sort of some tricks that St. Jude pulls off in order to make his point. So one of the things you need to know about the letter of St. Jude is that it follows a traditional ancient Greco-Roman pattern for letter writing. So when we write letters in English or emails in English, usually what we do is we start off the email by saying, "Dear so-and-so," and then we write the letter, and then we end it by saying "sincerely," and then your name, or "love," and then your name, right? That's not how letters worked in the ancient world. In the ancient world, when you were writing a letter, you would start off in the first line by identifying who you are. So you would say your name in the first line, and then you would say who you're writing to, and then you would use the third line to give a greeting to your audience or a blessing to your audience. So this is what St. James does. So in the first line, he identifies himself. He says, Jude, sorry, I said James, I meant Jude. He says, Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and brother of James. So so he's identifying himself here by talking about his connection to his brother James, which is a blood connection. And then he also talks about the fact that he is a servant of Jesus Christ. Now remember, St. Jude is probably a relative of Jesus. Right? We know that James the Lesser is a brother of Jesus, and if Jude is the brother of James the Lesser, which he seems to be, then that would mean Jude is like a cousin of Jesus. But Jude doesn't say Jude, a cousin of Jesus Christ and a brother of James. No, he says Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and a brother of James. So why does this matter? Well, it matters that he calls himself a servant of Jesus Christ because he's emphasizing that his relationship to Jesus as a servant is more important than his relationship to Jesus as a blood relative, right? So he's acknowledging Christ's divinity. If he were to say, "Oh, I'm Jesus' cousin," right, that would make Jesus seem, that would put an emphasis on Jesus's humanity and on James heightened, or on Jude's heightened status. I don't know why I keep saying James. That's weird. It's because his brother's name is James. Jude has a heightened status because of his blood relation to Christ, but he doesn't cash in on that. Instead, he just says, "I'm a servant of Jesus." So here Jude gives himself a 3-part title, right? He says, "I'm Jude, I'm a servant of Jesus Christ, and I'm the brother of James. Okay, and then in verse 2, he identifies who his audience is. He says, this is who I'm writing to. He says, to those who are called, beloved in God the Father, and kept for Jesus Christ, may mercy, peace, and love be multiplied to you. So here we have both the last two parts of this formula that you would use for the letter. Right? The part that says who you're writing to, and then the blessing or greeting. So let's start off with what he calls his audience. So he says he's writing to those who are called. Now, called is an interesting word here, right? Because our English word called is translated from a Greek word called ekkaleo, which is where we get the word ecclesia from. And ecclesia means church. So basically what Jude is saying is that the first step to being a Christian is being called ekkaleo, ecclesia, by Christ. And then he says, after they're called, they are beloved in God the Father. Right? So the next step to being a member of the Christian community, so first you're called, and then you are beloved by God. And then by being God's beloved, this brings you to the third and final step, which is belonging to Jesus Christ. So he says, and kept for Jesus Christ. So this is his audience. It's Christians, right? Those who are called, who become beloved, and who are kept for Christ. Finally, Jude gives a three-part blessing to finish off the beginning of his letter. He says, may mercy, peace, and love be multiplied to you. Right? So we know what mercy is. We know what peace is. Peace is connected to mercy because you can't really have peace unless you first have mercy. And then finally, both peace and mercy feed into love, which is the most important gift God gives. Right? So obviously, Jude is very interested in speaking in threes. Right? Everything, we're going to see a pattern in St. Jude's letter of threes. He really, really likes listing things in threes. And the reason is because he's making a subtle reference to the Holy Trinity. He wants us to associate what he is saying with the Trinity, the most fundamental of all Christian beliefs. All right. Next, Jude, in verse 4, talks about the reason he's writing this letter. So he says he's writing because he wants these Christians to keep their faith in spite of an external threat to it. Now, what is this threat? This threat comes from a group of people who have been infiltrating the churches, right? They've been traveling around and they've been acting and preaching immoral things and preaching things that are not true about Jesus. Some are denying the parousia and others are denying that Jesus is divine. So Jude says, for admission has been secretly gained by some ungodly persons who pervert the grace of our God into licentiousness and deny Christ. Right? So James is identifying a threat. And he's saying, the reason I'm writing you this letter is to encourage you to persevere in your Christian faith in spite of this threat. He's saying there's these really dangerous teachers. They're called ungodly persons. And they're traveling around and they're pretending to be Christians. And what do? They pervert the grace of God into licentiousness. Right? In other words, they acknowledge that the death of Christ on the cross has freed mankind from sin, right? That his blood has made it possible for all to be redeemed from their sin, right? That the grace of God is powerful enough to save everyone from their sin, right? And all that is true, but then they draw a false conclusion from it. And they say, because Jesus died on the cross for you, that means you're saved no matter what. That means you can do anything you want to do, right? You can live the most sinful life possible and it doesn't matter. Jesus' blood was sufficient for you. Jesus has decided God has made it so that everyone is going to be saved. So that means you can live your life however you want, pursue your pleasures however you want, regardless of if they're sinful or not, because after the death of Christ on the cross, there's really no such thing as sin anymore. Right? And this is what Jude means when he says they pervert the grace of God. They're twisting it into something bad. So he says these false teachers are saying, congratulations, Jesus died on the cross. Now you're free. You're free to do whatever you want. But they misunderstand what freedom is. So for these men, freedom means like free love, like living like a hippie, right? I can do whatever I want. I'm going to do whatever makes me feel good, right? But this is not true freedom. Right? True freedom is not, I get to do whatever I want. Instead, true freedom is obeying God's laws. Right? How do we know true freedom comes from obeying God's laws? Well, because true freedom comes from obeying human laws too. You can't really be free to, play basketball unless you are following the rules that you have to follow to be able to play basketball, right? If you get rid of all the rules, you're not really playing basketball anymore. You're not free to play basketball, right? You need a referee in order to play a real basketball game. Right? So God's laws provide boundaries for behavior which make it possible to be free. Christ achieved freedom from sin by obeying the Father, even to the point of death on the cross. Likewise, we achieve freedom from sin because we have the grace that Christ has given us, his sacrificed blood, which empowers us to obey God as well. All right, that's it for this lesson. Tomorrow I'll pick up with verse 5 and beyond.